On the night of October 14, 2024, the NYPD received a silent panic alarm from Veau, the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. The target was Julian Thorne, a billionaire defense contractor worth $40 billion. 5 highly trained mercenaries walked through the front door with one goal: a public execution. They had the weapons, the element of surprise, and the tactical advantage. They expected Thorne's bodyguards. They expected the police. But there was one thing they didn't account for. They didn't account for the woman pouring the wine at table 7. Her name tag said Sarah, but her FBI file, which had been sealed for 6 years, said something very different. This is the true story of how a waitress with a dark past took down a hit squad with nothing but a steak knife and a napkin. To understand why the events of that Tuesday night became classified, you first have to understand the layout of Veau. It sits on East 60th Street, a fortress of old money and new secrets. There are no walk-ins. You don't call for a reservation. You are invited. At 7:45 p.m., the atmosphere was perfect. The lighting was amber. The smell of truffle oil and aged cognac hung in the air, and the clinking of silver against bone china created a soft, rhythmic hum. In the center of the room sat table 1, the power seat. Occupying it was Julian Thorne. If you read the Wall Street Journal, you know Thorne. He was the CEO of Chimera Dynamics, a private military contracting firm that had recently come under fire for its operations in Eastern Europe. Thorne was 52, handsome in a jagged, aggressive way, and loud. He wore a Brioni suit that cost more than most people's cars, and he was currently berating the sommelier because the Chateau Margaux hadn't breathed long enough. Sitting opposite him was his wife, Eleanor, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the upholstery, and his head of security, a man named Marcus Vane. Vane was a former Navy SEAL, massive and imposing, scanning the room every 30 seconds. He was the best money could buy. But the most dangerous person in that room wasn't the billionaire with the private army. And it wasn't the ex-SEAL with the Glock holstered under his jacket. It was the waitress refilling their water glasses. Her name, at least the name on her payroll, was Sarah Miller. She was 34, with brown hair pulled back in a severe, messy bun and faint dark circles under her eyes that suggested she worked double shifts. She was quiet, invisible, the type of person you look at and immediately forget. Sarah had been working at Veau for 8 months. The manager, a nervous Frenchman named Henri, liked her because she never complained, never dropped a plate, and moved with an efficiency that was almost robotic. She didn't socialize with the other staff. She took her breaks alone in the alleyway, smoking cheap cigarettes, and staring at the brick wall with a 1,000-yard stare that the busboys joked about behind her back. "She's weird," one of the chefs had said a week prior. "Walks like a cat, never makes a sound." Tonight, Sarah was tired. She had rent due on a studio apartment in Queens, and her lower back was throbbing. She moved to table 1, holding a pitcher of ice water. "More water, sir?" she asked, her voice flat. Julian Thorne didn't even look up from his phone. He just waved a hand dismissively, nearly knocking the pitcher out of her grip. "Just fill it. And tell the kitchen my steak is taking too long. I don't pay $500 a plate to wait." "Yes, sir," Sarah said. She poured the water with a steady hand. As she turned to leave, her eyes, pale, gray, and incredibly sharp, did something Vane, the security guard, missed. She scanned the room. Not casually. She scanned the exits. She noted that the table of 4 businessmen in the corner hadn't touched their appetizers. She noted that the busboy near the kitchen door was sweating profusely, even though the AC was on full blast. Old habits die hard. Sarah wasn't just a waitress. 6 years ago, her name had been distinct. She was Captain Elena Vance, a field operative for the Defense Intelligence Agency's Special Activities Division. She specialized in asymmetric warfare and close-quarters combat. She had disappeared off the grid after a mission in Aleppo went sideways, leaving her with a dishonorable discharge that was entirely political and a desire to never hold a gun again. She just wanted a normal life. She wanted to pay her bills and sleep without nightmares. But as she walked back toward the kitchen, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. It was a sensation she hadn't felt since Aleppo, a sudden drop in air pressure, the silence before the boom. She stopped near the service station and looked at the front door. At 8:03 p.m., the heavy oak doors opened. 5 men entered. They weren't wearing masks. They were dressed in dark tactical gear, disguised as high-end motorcycle leathers. But the way they moved gave them away instantly. They moved in a V formation. Professional. Synchronized. The man at the point of the V was tall, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. Later, police reports would identify him as Nikolai Volkov, a freelance mercenary wanted by Interpol for 3 high-profile assassinations in Berlin. He didn't scream. He didn't shout, "Everybody down." He simply raised a suppressed MP7 submachine gun and fired 2 shots into the ceiling. Thwip, thwip. The sound was like a staple gun, not a cannon, but the shattering of the crystal chandelier was deafening. "Nobody moves," Volkov said. His voice was calm, almost bored. "Nobody speaks. You," he pointed the gun at the maitre d', "lock the door." Chaos usually erupts in screams, but in the first few seconds of a professional hit, there is only a freezing silence. The diners were paralyzed. Julian Thorne froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Marcus Vane, the head of security, reacted instantly. He was good. He shoved the table aside, reaching for his weapon, putting his body between Thorne and the gunman. "Gun!" Vane roared. It was the last word he ever said. One of the men on Volkov's flank, a sniper named Jensen, didn't hesitate. He double-tapped Vane. 2 shots to the chest, right through the Kevlar weave of his expensive suit. Vane collapsed backward, crashing into the dessert cart. Julian Thorne screamed. It was a high, pathetic sound. "Everyone on the floor, now!" Volkov commanded, stepping over the threshold. The restaurant erupted into panic. Diners dove under tables. Glasses shattered. The smell of expensive wine mixed with the copper scent of blood. Sarah was standing by the kitchen swing doors. She could have run. The kitchen exit led to the alley. She could have been out the back door and halfway to the subway before they secured the perimeter. That was the smart play. That was the survival play. She took 1 step back, her hand pushing the kitchen door open. Then she saw the little girl. At table 4, a family was celebrating a birthday. A 7-year-old girl, frozen in terror, was sitting alone on the banquette while her parents cowered on the floor, frantically trying to pull her down. The girl was staring right at Volkov, who was walking steadily toward Julian Thorne's table, swinging the barrel of his gun left and right. Volkov stopped. He looked at the screaming Thorne, then he looked at the patrons. He didn't want witnesses. "Clean the room," Volkov said to his men. Sarah stopped. Her hand released the kitchen door. It swung shut. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of fear and gunpowder. Her posture changed. The slump of the tired waitress vanished. Her shoulders squared. Her chin dipped. Her hands, which had been trembling slightly from caffeine withdrawal earlier, became rock steady. She reached onto the service counter and picked up the nearest object. It wasn't a gun. It was a linen napkin and a heavy-bottomed glass decanter filled with red wine. Sarah Miller left the building. Elena Vance entered the room. The strategy of the attackers was a classic shock and awe containment. 2 men secured the front door. 1 man, Jensen, moved to cover the kitchen entrance to prevent staff from escaping. Volkov and the 5th man, a hulking brute named Kale, moved toward the target. They had total control, or so they thought. Jensen, the man who had shot the bodyguard, moved toward the kitchen with military efficiency. He was scanning for movement. He saw the swinging door where Sarah had been standing a second ago, but now it was still. He assumed the staff had fled. He kicked the kitchen doors open, leveling his weapon. "Kitchen clear!" he shouted to Volkov. He was wrong. As Jensen stepped across the threshold onto the white tiles of the kitchen, he didn't check the blind spot behind the door. Sarah was pressed flat against the wall, standing on top of a crate of potatoes to give herself height. As Jensen's barrel passed her, she didn't go for the gun. She went for the senses. She dropped the heavy linen napkin over his head. In the fraction of a second that Jensen was blinded and confused, Sarah dropped from the crate. She used the momentum of her fall to drive the heavy glass wine decanter down onto the base of his skull. Crack. The sound was sickeningly wet. Jensen's knees buckled immediately. He didn't even have time to pull the trigger. He slumped forward, unconscious before he hit the floor. Sarah didn't pause to check his pulse. She knew exactly how much force she had applied. He was out for at least 20 minutes. She stripped the MP7 from his hands. She checked the mag. Full. Safety off. She looked at her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator. A waitress in a stained apron holding a silent submachine gun. She looked ridiculous. She looked deadly. "1 down," she whispered, 4 to go. Out in the dining room, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Volkov had reached table 1. He grabbed Julian Thorne by the lapels of his $3,000 suit and hauled him to his feet. Julian Thorne, Volkov smiled, revealing teeth capped in silver. Your shareholders send their regards. Thorne was weeping. I'll pay you. Whatever they're paying you, I'll double it, triple it. I have accounts in the Caymans. This isn't about money, Mr. Thorne, Volkov said, pressing the muzzle of his weapon against Thorne's forehead. This is about sending a message. Volkov signaled to Kale. Set up the camera. We livestream the execution. Kale laughed, a low rumble, and pulled a tripod from his bag. The other patrons were sobbing quietly into the carpet. The 2 men at the door were scanning the street outside, watching for the police response time. They knew they had about 4 minutes before the first sirens. Suddenly, the lights in the restaurant flickered. Then, they went out completely. Total darkness engulfed Veau door. What the hell? Volkov shouted. Kyle, check the breaker. I can't see a thing. Kale yelled back. In the darkness, a sound echoed through the room. It wasn't a gunshot. It was a voice. A woman's voice. Calm. Projected from different points in the room, as if she were moving. You have made a tactical error, the voice said. Who is that? Volkov spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Show yourself. You didn't check the perimeter, the voice continued. It came from behind the bar now. And you entered a kill box without an exit strategy. Kill her! Volkov screamed to his men at the door. The 2 men at the door turned their flashlights inward, sweeping the room. The beams of light danced over overturned tables and terrified diners. One of the beams caught a glimpse of movement near the wine rack. One of the mercenaries, a guy named Miller, fired a burst. Glass exploded, showering the floor with vintage Cabernet. I got her, Miller yelled. No! The voice whispered. This time, it was right behind him. Miller spun around, but he was too slow. Sarah emerged from the shadows like a wraith. She didn't shoot him. A gunshot would give away her position too clearly in the dark. Instead, she used the environment. She jammed a silver steak knife into the soft gap of his tactical vest, right between the collarbone and the neck protection. Miller gurgled and dropped his weapon, clutching at his neck. Sarah kicked his legs out from under him and slammed his head into the hostess stand. Silence returned to the room. 2 down, Sarah's voice echoed. Volkov was starting to sweat. This wasn't a panic-stricken civilian, this was a predator. Kale, forget the camera, Volkov roared. Kill everyone! Start shooting! Flush her out! This was the turning point. The moment the robbery turned into a massacre. Kale raised his assault rifle and aimed it blindly into the center of the room, toward the huddled masses of diners. Sarah saw him. She was crouched behind the grand piano, 30 feet away. She had Jensen's MP7. She had a clear line of sight on Kale, but if she missed, or if the bullets overpenetrated, she would hit the family at table 4. She couldn't shoot. She looked down at her hand. She was holding a bottle of high-proof brandy she had swiped from the bar. Hey, big guy! Sarah shouted. Kale turned toward the voice, his flashlight blindingly bright. Sarah threw the bottle. It wasn't a direct hit. She threw it high, arching over the tables. Pull! She whispered. As the bottle reached the apex of its arc, right above Kale's head, Sarah fired a single shot. The bullet shattered the bottle. Alcohol rained down on Kale. What the? Kale sputtered, wiping the stinging liquid from his eyes. Sarah fired a second shot. This one wasn't aimed at Kale. It was aimed at the decorative candle flickering on the table right next to him. The bullet sparked against the metal candle holder. The spark met the vapor of the high-proof brandy. Oosh. Kale wasn't just wet, he was flammable. A fireball erupted in the center of the dining room. Kale screamed, dropping his weapon to bat at the flames on his tactical gear. The distraction was all Sarah needed. She vaulted over the piano, sprinting across the room while the remaining men were distracted by their burning comrade. She wasn't running away. She was running toward Julian Thorne. Volkov saw her coming. He raised his weapon. Die, you bee! TCH! He pulled the trigger. Volkov pulled the trigger, the muzzle flash lighting up the darkened dining room like a strobe light. But Sarah Miller, Elena Vance, wasn't there anymore. A split second before Volkov fired, Sarah didn't run away from the bullets. She dropped. She performed a baseball slide on the polished mahogany floor, her apron slick with spilled wine, carrying her momentum directly under the heavy oak table of Table 2. The bullets that were meant for her chest shredded the tablecloth and decimated a vase of white roses, sending petals and porcelain flying like shrapnel. Sarah didn't stop. She used her momentum to kick the legs of Table 2. The table was solid oak, weighing at least 200 pounds, but with the adrenaline flooding her system and the leverage of her position, she managed to upend it. The table crashed onto its side, forming a heavy wooden barricade between her and Volkov. Thud, thud, thud. 3 more rounds slammed into the wood, punching through but losing their lethal velocity. Splinters rained down on Sarah's face, cutting her cheek. She didn't flinch. She grabbed Julian Thorne by his belt. The billionaire was hyperventilating, his eyes wide and vacant. He was in shock. "Move or die, Julian," she hissed, her voice low and terrifyingly calm. I can't," he stammered. Sarah didn't argue. She slapped him. Hard. The sound cracked through the room, louder than the gunshots. "Move!" She dragged him, crawling across the floor, using the overturned table as cover. They were heading for the service corridor that connected the dining room to the wine cellar and the manager's office. It was a choke point. If they could get there, she could defend it. "Kale!" Volkov screamed. "Get up! Flank her left!" Kale, the man Sarah had set on fire, was still screaming. But he was a professional. He had managed to smother the flames on his vest with a tablecloth. He was burned, angry, and hurt, but he was still combat effective. He raised his rifle, looking for a target. Sarah saw Kale moving in her peripheral vision. She had Jensen's MP7, but she had never checked the fire selector. She hoped. It was on semi-auto. She popped up from behind the table for less than a second. Pop, pop. 2 shots. Controlled. Precise. 1 bullet hit Kale in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second shattered the fire alarm junction box on the wall behind him. The alarm began to blare, a deafening, ear-piercing shriek accompanied by flashing strobe lights. "Go! Go! Go!" Sarah yelled, shoving Thorne into the corridor. She followed him, spinning around to fire a suppression burst at the remaining men to keep their heads down. She made it into the hallway and kicked the heavy service door shut behind them. She didn't lock it. Locks don't stop breaching rounds. Instead, she grabbed a heavy metal shelving unit filled with clean linens and tipped it over in front of the door. It wouldn't hold them forever, but it would buy them 30 seconds. Sarah grabbed Thorne and dragged him down the hall. "Where are we going?" Thorne wheezed, clutching his chest. "My heart. I have a condition." "You're going to have a bullet in your brain if you don't shut up," Sarah said. She pushed him into the manager's office at the end of the hall. It was a small room, windowless, with a heavy steel door. Henri, the manager, was hiding under his desk, shaking like a leaf. "Sarah?" Henri squeaked. "Mon Dieu, what is happening?" "Henri, give me your phone," Sarah commanded. I dropped it. Outside," Sarah cursed. She patted down Thorne. "Phone. Now." Thorne fumbled in his jacket and produced a sleek, encrypted satellite phone. Sarah snatched it. She didn't dial 911. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 6 years. A number that didn't technically exist. It rang once. "Trace active," a robotic voice said. "Status Blackbird," Sarah said, using her old code name. "Safe house compromised. Hostile force, platoon strength. I have a high-value asset. I need extraction." There was a pause. A human voice came on the line, cold, unfamiliar. "Captain Vance? You're listed as deceased." "Does it sound like I'm dead?" Sarah snapped as a spray of bullets hit the hallway door outside, the sound muffled by the steel but still terrifying. "I'm at Veau on 60th. I have Julian Thorne. We are under siege. Send the cavalry." "We can't," the voice said. "Thorne is—" "Listen, Vance. You need to hold. NYPD is 2 minutes out. Do not let them take Thorne. Do you understand? The package cannot be acquired." "Why?" "Because if Volkov takes Thorne, he doesn't just get money. He gets the launch codes for the Chimera drone prototype." Thorne is the biological key. Sarah looked at the sweating billionaire. He wasn't just a rich guy. He was a walking weapon of mass destruction. Understood, Sarah said, and crushed the phone under her heel. She looked at Henri. Is there another way out of this office? No, only the door. Sarah looked at the air vent near the ceiling. It was too small. They were trapped. Boom. The barricade in the hallway was breached. The door to the office shook violently as a heavy boot slammed into it. Open the door, BTCH! Volkov's voice came through the steel. We know you're in there. Give us Thorne, and I'll let the Frenchman live. Sarah looked at Henri. He was looking at her with wide, trusting eyes. Don't listen to him, Henri, she whispered. He's going to kill everyone anyway. Sarah looked around the room. A desk. A computer. A safe. A frantic billionaire. And a terrified manager. She had one magazine in the MP7, maybe 20 rounds left. There were at least 3 hostile shooters outside wearing body armor. This wasn't a fight she could win with firepower. She had to win it with psychology. She walked to the door. Volkov! She shouted through the steel. Silence on the other side. I'm listening. You want the codes? Sarah yelled. Thorne's head snapped up. What? How do you know about? Sarah clamped a hand over Thorne's mouth. I have a gun to Thorne's head. Sarah lied. You come through that door, I paint the wall with his brains. Then nobody gets the money. Nobody gets the drones. You go home to your clients empty-handed. How long do you think you'll survive then? There was a long silence. Sarah could hear Volkov breathing on the other side of the door. You wouldn't, Volkov said. You're a waitress. Check the body of the man I left in the dining room, Sarah said coldly. Check the man with the knife in his neck. Does that look like waiter service to you? She waited. This was the gamble. If Volkov called her bluff and breached, they were dead. If he hesitated, she bought time. Okay, Volkov said. We can negotiate. Back off, Sarah said. Back down the hall. I want proof of life on the hostages in the dining room. I'm not backing off, Volkov said. But I'll give you 5 minutes. After that, I start killing waiters. 1 every 60 seconds. Starting with the little girl at table 4. Sarah's blood ran cold. The girl. She looked at her watch. 8:12 p.m. The sirens were just starting to wail in the distance. The siege had officially begun. Outside Veau door, the world had turned into a kaleidoscope of red and blue lights. Detective Ray Reynolds of the NYPD Emergency Service Unit, ESU, slammed his car doors shut and ducked behind the engine block as he assessed the scene. It was a nightmare. The restaurant was a fortress. Heavy stone facade, narrow windows, single entry point. What's the situation? Reynolds barked at a uniformed officer. Hostiles inside. Automatic weapons. We have reports of multiple casualties. We tried to approach the glass, and they put a burst through a patrol car. Officer down on the perimeter, we dragged him back. How many hostages? Full house? Maybe 40. Plus staff. Reynolds rubbed his temples. This was way above his pay grade. Get the negotiator. Get the sniper teams on the roofs across the street. And cut the power to the building. Power is already cut, sir. They cut it from the inside. Reynolds frowned. Who cuts their own power? They have night vision, a voice said behind him. Reynolds turned. A woman in a dark windbreaker had appeared out of nowhere. She flashed a badge that Reynolds didn't recognize. It wasn't NYPD. It wasn't FBI. It was just a Silver Eagle. Special Agent Hayes, she said. Department of Homeland Security. This is my jurisdiction now. Like hell it is, Reynolds spat. This is my city. Inside that building is a man named Julian Thorne, Hayes said, ignoring him. If the men inside get what they want from him, New York won't be your city anymore. It'll be a crater. Reynolds stared at her. Okay. What do you know about the shooters? Mercenaries. Eastern European, highly trained. But that's not what you should be worried about. What should I be worried about? Hayes handed him a tablet. On the screen was a grainy image taken from the restaurant's security feed before the cameras were shot out. It showed a woman in a waitress uniform holding a submachine gun, standing over a prone body. Her, Hayes said. Sarah Miller. The waitress is in on it? No, Hayes shook her head. The waitress is the only thing keeping those people alive. Her real name is Captain Elena Vance. She's a ghost. We thought she was dead. If she's in there, Volkov is having a very bad night. Blank. Inside the manager's office, the air was getting stale. Sarah paced the small room. 5 minutes. Volkov had given her 5 minutes before he started executing hostages. She had used 2 of them. She looked at Thorne. He was sitting on the floor, hugging his knees. Why you? Sarah asked. Why tonight? Thorne looked up. He looked broken. The Chimera Project. It's a drone swarm. Autonomous AI. It doesn't need a pilot, it just needs a target profile. We finished the prototype last week. The activation key is biometric. Retinal scan and voice print. They need me to unlock the server. And if you do, they download the source code. They can sell it to anyone. Terrorists. Rogue states. It's unblockable, Sarah. It could kill thousands. Sarah nodded. So we can't let them take you. Are you going to kill me? Thorne whispered. Not if I can help it, Sarah said. She turned to Henri. The ventilation. Where does it go? Henri looked up at the vent. It connects to the main AC unit on the roof, but the duct is too small for a person. Not for a person, Sarah said, but maybe for a surprise. She looked at the safe in the corner. Henri opened the safe. Why? Just do it. Henri scrambled to the safe and punched in the code. Inside were stacks of cash, the night's takings, and a few bottles of vintage liquor kept for special guests. Sarah ignored the cash. She grabbed a bottle of 150 proof rum and a box of cleaning chemicals, ammonia and bleach, that were sitting on the bottom shelf, used for cleaning the safe itself. She looked at the cleaning supplies. It was crude. It was dangerous. But it was chemistry. Henri, give me your apron, she said. She began to rip the cloth into strips. What are you doing? Thorne asked. Chloramine gas, Sarah said. If I mix the bleach and ammonia, it creates a toxic gas, heavier than air. If I can pump it into the hallway, you'll kill us too, Thorne cried. Not if we seal the door with wet towels, Sarah said. And not if I direct the flow. She looked at the vent. Does this vent push air out or pull it in? It recycles, Henri said. It pulls air from the room and cycles it to the hallway. Sarah smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Perfect. She checked her watch. 4 minutes gone. 1 minute left. Volkov! She shouted through the door again. Time's up. Come out with your hands up, Volkov shouted back. Or the girl dies. I'm coming out, Sarah yelled. Don't shoot. I'm bringing Thorne, she turned to Thorne. Get against the back wall. Put this wet towel over your face. Do not breathe through your nose. She handed Henri a towel, too. Cover the bottom of the door. Tight. Sarah grabbed the bucket she had mixed the chemicals in. The fumes were already starting to rise, acrid and stinging. She climbed up onto the desk and shoved the bucket into the open vent intake. The fan grabbed the fumes. The AC system did exactly what Henri said it would. It sucked the toxic cloud out of the office and pushed it into the ventilation output, which was directly in the hallway where Volkov and his men were waiting to breach. Sarah jumped down and pressed her own wet towel to her face. 10 seconds later, she heard it, coughing, retching. The gas hit the hallway. It wasn't lethal immediately, but it burned the eyes, the throat, and the lungs. It caused panic. Gas! Gas! Someone screamed in the corridor. Move back! Back to the dining room! Volkov choked out. Sarah heard the heavy footsteps retreating. She grabbed the MP7. Stay here, she told Thorne and Henri. Don't open this door for anyone but me. Where are you going? Henri cried. They're retreating, Sarah said, her eyes hard. Which means they're disorganized. I'm not waiting for them to regroup. I'm going to finish this. She moved the shelving unit. She unlocked the door. She stepped out into the hallway. The air was hazy and stung her eyes, but she stayed low, where the gas was thinner. She moved silently down the corridor, toward the dining room. She reached the edge of the hallway, where it opened up into the main restaurant floor. She peeked around the corner. The scene was chaos. The hostages were screaming. The mercenaries were coughing, wiping their eyes. Volkov was by the bar, pouring water into his eyes. He was vulnerable. Sarah raised the MP7. She had a clean shot. But just as she tightened her finger on the trigger, she stopped. At table 1, Thorne's table, Eleanor Thorne, the wife, was standing up. She wasn't coughing. She wasn't crying. She was holding a pistol. And she was pointing it at the head of the 7-year-old girl from table 4. Volkov looked up, his eyes red and streaming, and looked at Eleanor. "Took you long enough," Eleanor said to Volkov. "Get the husband. I'll handle the waitress." Sarah froze. The wife wasn't a hostage. She was the employer. And now, Sarah had lost the element of surprise. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stood at the edge of the dining room, the submachine gun heavy in her hands, her eyes locked on Eleanor Thorne. The billionaire's wife wasn't trembling anymore. Her posture was rigid, authoritative. She held the Sig Sauer P229 with a grip that suggested she had spent time at a range. The barrel was pressed firmly against the temple of the 7-year-old girl, whose whimpers had turned into a silent, catatonic shock. "Drop the gun, Captain," Eleanor said. Her voice was ice. "Or I paint this girl's brains all over the birthday cake." Sarah hesitated. In a straight fight, she could drop Eleanor before the woman blinked. But a reflex shot? A muscle spasm from a dying woman could still pull a trigger. The risk was too high. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" Julian Thorne's voice came from the hallway behind Sarah. He had disregarded her order to stay put. He stood in the doorway, eyes wide, staring at his wife. "Ellie? Shut up, Julian," Eleanor snapped, not looking away from Sarah. "You always talk too much. That's why we're here." Volkov, wiping the last of the chemical tears from his eyes, laughed. It was a dark, wet sound. "I told you, Mr. Thorne. It's a message." He moved toward Sarah, his rifle raised. "Drop it, now." Sarah looked at the girl. She looked at Volkov. She looked at Eleanor. She slowly bent her knees and placed the MP7 on the floor. She kicked it away. "Smart," Volkov grunted. He didn't hesitate. He swung the stock of his rifle in a brutal arc, catching Sarah across the jaw. Crack! Sarah's world spun. She tasted copper. She hit the floor hard, the room tilting violently. Before she could recover, Cale, the burned man, was on top of her. He was screaming in pain from his burns, and he took it out on her. He kicked her in the ribs. "Once, twice, enough," Eleanor commanded. "Tie her up. In the center. I want her to watch." Cale hauled Sarah up, zip-tying her hands behind her back around a heavy wooden chair in the center of the room. He pulled the ties so tight they cut into her wrists. Julian Thorne was dragged out by Volkov and thrown to his knees next to Sarah. "Why?" Julian wept, looking up at his wife. "I gave you everything. The houses, the cars, the life." "You gave me an allowance, Julian," Eleanor screamed, her composure cracking for a second. "You treat me like one of your employees. And now? You're selling the company? You're retiring? The prenup says if we divorce, I get nothing. If you sell, I get a stipend." She walked closer, the gun still trained on the terrified patrons, though she kept a loose aim on the child. "But if you die," Eleanor smiled, "I inherit the board seat. I inherit the sale. I inherit $40 billion. "You hired them?" Julian whispered. "I hired Volkov to make it look like a terrorist attack," Eleanor said. "A martyr for the military-industrial complex. A tragedy. I play the grieving widow, and I cash the check." She turned to Volkov. "Get the codes. Then kill him. Then kill the waitress. Then we leave." Volkov nodded. He pulled a tablet from his tactical vest and held it in front of Julian's face. "Retinal scan, Mr. Thorne. Open the Chimera server." Julian shook his head. "No, I won't give you the drones." Volkov sighed. He pulled a knife from his belt, a serrated combat blade. "I didn't want to do this the messy way," Volkov said, "but I have a schedule to keep." He grabbed Julian's left hand and slammed it onto the table. He raised the knife. "Wait," Sarah croaked. Her jaw was swollen, and blood trickled from her mouth. Volkov paused. "Any last words, waitress?" "She's lying to you, Volkov," Sarah said, her voice raspy but audible. "Shut up," Eleanor snapped. "She doesn't have the money," Sarah continued, locking eyes with the mercenary. She told you she'd pay you from the inheritance? From the sale? Volkov narrowed his eyes. So? Julian Thorne's assets are frozen the moment he dies, Sarah said. She told you she was bluffing, relying on her knowledge of high-level finance from her intelligence days. The SEC investigates every CEO death. It takes years to probate a $40 billion estate. She can't pay you. Not today, not next week. You're doing this pro bono. Volkov froze. He looked at Eleanor. She's lying, Eleanor shrieked. I have accounts. I have liquidity. Show him, Sarah challenged. Show him the transfer. Volkov's grip on the knife loosened. He looked at Eleanor with a new, dangerous curiosity. The waitress makes a point, Mrs. Thorne. The second half of our fee. Transfer it now. I can't do it until the job is done, Eleanor stammered. Problem, Volkov said. He stepped away from Julian and turned toward Eleanor. The dynamic in the room shifted. The predator was now looking at his employer. Kill her! Eleanor screamed, pointing her gun at Sarah. Kill her now, or the deal is off. The deal, Volkov said softly, has changed. Outside the glass, the red and blue lights were intensifying. The NYPD had been joined by darker, heavier vehicles. Bearcats, armored personnel carriers. Agent Hayes was watching the thermal feed from a drone hovering near the skylight. Target acquisition, Hayes said into her radio. I see 3 heat signatures standing. 2, kneeling. 1 holds a weapon on a child. 1 holds a weapon on the kneeling targets. Who has the child? Reynolds asked. The wife, Hayes said grimly. We have to breach. If the dynamics inside shift, they start executing hostages to regain control. Breach teams ready? Reynolds barked. Alpha at the front. Bravo at the kitchen. Charlie on the roof. The radio crackled. Execute on my mark, Hayes said. 3, 2, 1. Crash. The skylight exploded. It wasn't just glass falling. It was flashbang grenades. 4 of them dropped into the center of the dining room on repelling lines. Bang, 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 bang. The sound was earth-shattering. A blinding white light turned the dim restaurant into a magnesium flare. The concussive blast knocked the wind out of everyone standing. Eleanor screamed and covered her ears, dropping her gun. Volkov, a seasoned veteran, had turned away instinctively the moment he heard the glass break, preserving his vision. But he was disoriented. Cale, standing by the kitchen door, fired wildly into the ceiling. Sarah didn't flinch. She had anticipated this. As the flashbangs went off, she didn't cover her ears. She used the chaos. She slammed her dislocated thumb, a painful trick she had learned in CR school, against the arm of the chair. She slid her hand out of the zip tie. It tore the skin, blood slicking her wrist, but she was free. She didn't go for a gun. She went for Eleanor. Sarah launched herself from the chair, tackling the billionaire's wife, just as Eleanor reached for her fallen pistol. They crashed into the dessert cart, sending cakes and silverware flying. Sarah wasn't a waitress anymore. She was pure rage. She drove her knee into Eleanor's stomach, knocking the wind out of her, then delivered a sharp, precise strike to the temple. Eleanor went limp instantly. Sarah grabbed Eleanor's pistol. "Get down!" Sarah screamed at the hostages. Volkov had recovered. He saw Sarah. He raised his rifle. This was it. The duel. But before Volkov could fire, the front doors exploded inward. The NYPD, ESU team breached with a battering ram. "Police, drop it!" Volkov was flanked. He had police at the front, Sarah at his side. He made a choice. He grabbed Julian Thorne, hauling the billionaire up as a human shield. "Back off!" Volkov roared, pressing his knife to Julian's throat. "I kill him! I swear to God, I kill him!" The police froze. The laser sights danced on Volkov's chest, but they couldn't take the shot. Julian was too big, covering Volkov's vital zones. "I want a helicopter!" Volkov screamed. "Roof access!" "Now!" He began to drag Julian toward the kitchen, moving backward. Sarah was crouching behind the overturned table. She had the Sig Sauer P229. She had a line of sight, but it was tight. Maybe 2 inches of Volkov's head exposed behind Julian's ear. "Sarah!" Julian cried out, his voice strangling as the knife dug deeper. "Help me!" Volkov sneered. "She can't help you," She's nobody. Sarah took a breath. She closed her eyes for a millisecond, visualizing the trajectory. She ignored the screaming, the sirens, the smell of cordite. She went back to the range at Quantico. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. She opened her eyes. She exhaled. She pulled the trigger. Bang. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Julian Thorne flinched. Volkov's head snapped back violently. A red mist sprayed against the white tiles of the kitchen wall. His body went rigid, then collapsed backward, the knife clattering harmlessly to the floor. Julian fell forward, scrambling away from the corpse on his hands and knees, gasping for air. Silence returned to Veau door. The SWAT team swarmed the room. Clear! Clear! Suspect down! Officers grabbed Cale, who was trying to crawl out the back. They handcuffed the unconscious Eleanor. Sarah sat on the floor, the gun dangling from her fingers. She felt the adrenaline crash. Her hands started to shake. Agent Hayes walked through the shattered front door, stepping over the debris. She holstered her weapon and walked straight to Sarah. She looked down at the waitress, bloodied, bruised, covered in soot and wine. "Nice shot, Captain," Hayes said softly. Sarah looked up. "It's Sarah. Just Sarah." Hayes smiled a little. "Sure. Sarah." Julian Thorne was being attended to by paramedics. He pushed them away and stumbled over to Sarah. He looked at his wife being loaded onto a stretcher, handcuffed. Then he looked at the woman who had served him water an hour ago. "You," Julian stammered. "Who are you?" Sarah stood up, wincing as her ribs protested. She wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand. "I'm your waitress," she said. "And you still owe me for the wine." The lights of the NYPD cruisers didn't stop flashing for 48 hours. East 60th Street remained cordoned off. A canyon of yellow tape and crime scene investigators in white Tyvek suits. The tabloids called it the siege of the century. The New York Post ran the headline, "Dinner and a Death Wish." But amidst the chaos of the immediate aftermath, the triage units, the SWAT debriefings, the frantic press scrum pushing against the barricades, there was a hole in the narrative. Sarah Miller sat on the back bumper of an ambulance, a thermal blanket draped over her shoulders. An EMT was trying to clean the cut on her cheek, but Sarah wasn't looking at him. She was watching Julian Thorne being escorted into a black SUV by federal agents. He looked back, just once. Their eyes met through the chaos. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. A thank you. A goodbye. 10 minutes later, when Detective Reynolds returned to the ambulance to take her official statement, the bumper was empty. The thermal blanket was folded neatly on the asphalt. Sarah Miller was gone. She didn't go back to her apartment in Queens to pack. She knew that would be the first place they looked. Instead, she went to a locker in the Port Authority bus terminal, accessed via a key taped under a vending machine in the subway. Inside was a bag she had packed 4 years ago, a change of clothes, a burner phone, $3,000 in cash, and a Canadian passport with the name Emily Vance. By the time the NYPD issued a person of interest bulletin, not as a suspect, but as a witness, Sarah was already crossing the George Washington Bridge in a stolen Honda Civic headed west. The fallout for the Thorne family was biblical. Eleanor Thorne's trial was the highest-rated televised event of 2024. The prosecution's case was ironclad, bolstered by the testimony of the surviving mercenary, Cale. He sang like a bird to avoid the death penalty, detailing every meeting, every wire transfer, and Eleanor's explicit instructions to make her husband's death look like collateral damage. She was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms, without the possibility of parole at the ADX Florence Supermax facility. Julian Thorne, however, surprised everyone. The old Julian, the arrogant billionaire who berated sommeliers, died in that restaurant. The man who survived was different. 1 month after the attack, Thorne called an emergency board meeting at Chimera Dynamics. The boardroom was packed. The stock was volatile. Everyone expected him to announce a new security protocol, or a retaliatory strike against his competitors. Thorne stood at the head of the table. He looked tired. He hadn't slept properly since the night of the attack. "Gentlemen," Thorne said, sliding a single encrypted hard drive across the mahogany table. "This is the source code for the Chimera drone swarm." The board members leaned in, greedy eyes lighting up. It is worth $40 billion, Thorne continued. And it is the reason 5 men died in a restaurant, and my wife is in prison. Thorne pulled a heavy industrial magnet from his briefcase and slammed it onto the hard drive. The room gasped. The data was instantly corrupted, wiped clean. The project is canceled, Thorne said over the shouts of his executives. Chimera Dynamics is pivoting. We are no longer in the business of killing. From today, we build disaster relief infrastructure. If you don't like it, sell your shares. I'm buying them all back anyway. He walked out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. He spent the next 6 months trying to find her. He hired the best private investigators in the world. He hired ex-Mossad trackers. He hired cyber forensic specialists. They all came back with the same result. Nothing. Sarah Miller didn't exist. Elena Vance was legally dead. The woman was a ghost. She doesn't want to be found, Mr. Thorne, his head of security told him. You have to let it go. But Thorne had one card left to play. He didn't use spies. He used the only leverage he had left, Washington. 6 months later, the sun beat down on the cracked pavement of Route 66. Outside the town of Kingman, Arizona, there was a diner called the Rusty Spoon. It was the kind of place where the clock on the wall was always 10 minutes slow, and the coffee was always fresh. The lunch rush was over. The waitress, a woman with short blonde hair and a name tag that read Emily, was refilling the sugar dispensers. She moved with an efficiency that was too sharp for a roadside diner. She heard the door open, the chime of the bell, and she cataloged the sound of the footsteps. Heavy. Leather soles. A confident stride. She didn't turn around. She knew the walk. We're closed for service in 10 minutes, she said, her voice dropping an octave. I'm not hungry, a voice said. She turned. Standing there wasn't Julian Thorne. It was a man she recognized from a life she thought she had buried. It was Agent Miller. No relation. Her old handler from the Defense Intelligence Agency. The waitress's hand drifted toward the steak knife on the counter. A reflex. Easy, Captain, Agent Miller said, raising his hands. I'm not here to bring you in. Then why are you here? She asked, her eyes scanning the parking lot outside for backup. Julian Thorne made a call, Miller said, sitting on a stool. He called the president. He called the director of the CIA. He called everyone. He made a deal. He donated half his fortune to the Veterans Administration in exchange for one thing. Miller slid a thick manila envelope across the counter. She looked at it. What is this? It's a pardon, Miller said. Full and unconditional. Your record is scrubbed. The discharge is upgraded to honorable. The pension is restored. You're not a fugitive anymore, Elena. You're just a retired veteran. Elena stared at the envelope. For 6 years, she had slept with one eye open. She had jumped at every siren. She had lived a half-life, trapped in the shadows. Why? She whispered. Because he said you gave him a second chance, Miller said, standing up and adjusting his tie. He wanted to give you one, too. Miller turned to the door. Thorne sent a message, by the way, he said. The wine is on the house. The agent walked out, the bell chiming behind him, leaving the envelope on the counter. Elena Vance stood in the silence of the empty diner. She reached out and touched the paper. It was real. She looked out the window. The Arizona desert stretched out endlessly, vast and open. For the first time in a decade, it didn't look like a hiding place. It looked like a horizon. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter next to the sugar dispenser. She picked up the envelope. She walked to the door, flipped the sign to closed, and stepped out into the warm afternoon sun. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air that finally, truly, tasted free. And that brings us to the end of the story. Julian Thorne learned that the most valuable thing money can buy isn't a weapon, but a clean slate. And Sarah, or rather Captain Elena Vance, walked away not into the shadows, but into the light, finally free from the ghosts of her past. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the heroes among us are the ones we least expect, the quiet ones, the ones pouring the coffee, the ones watching the door. If you were on the edge of your seat for this story, please smash that like button. It helps us bring more true crime drama to the channel. And I want to know, do you think Julian Thorne did the right thing by destroying the technology? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Until next time, stay sharp and stay safe.